Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Opportunities and Pitfalls of Managing Feeding Cows in Automatic Milk Systems. My name is Victor Malaco, and I'm a Michigan State University Extension educator. I will serve as today's co-host in partnership with Camila Lage from Cornell Cooperative Extension. This webinar is part of a collaborative program between Michigan State University Extension and Cornell Cooperative Extension Southwest New York team. Thank you for joining us to talk about management and nutrition for cows in automatic milk systems, and thanks to our speakers, Salfer and Dr. Gregory Penner, for accepting our invitation. Before we get started, I would like to give some instructions about the webinar. We will have two back-to-back presentations, 25 minutes long each, and after that, we will have 20 minutes for a question and answer section. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can put it in the Q&A box. If you have any other questions, you can type direct to us in the chat. You can also call the Distance Center help desk if you have any trouble with your Zoom connection. To get started, I will pass it to Camila so she can introduce herself and our first speaker. I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Camila Lage, and I'm a dairy management specialist for the Cornell Cooperative Extension Southwest New York regional team. Today, our first presentation is titled Management Strategies for Cows in Automatic Milking Systems, and will be presented by James Salfer, a dairy extension professor from the University of Minnesota. Jim, together with other colleagues, has been doing extensive research and extension on automatic milking systems, and we are pleased to have him with us today to share a bit of his expertise. Jim, if you're ready, the stage is yours.
And we've been doing a lot of research at Minnesota looking at this, so I've got to recognize my colleague, Dr. Marcia Andres. She's an extension specialist. She's on campus, and we've done a number of projects starting in about 2011 with AMS projects. And so I'll talk a little bit about our experience, some of our research, some of the other research that's around and looking at managing AMS systems. Hopefully all our technology will work here. There we go. So some of the things I'm going to topic for today, you can see I've got one slide on economics because that always seems to come up no matter what you're talking about. Then my split up into transition management, barn design, then some general strategies to achieve high production per cow and per robot, and then overall some general strategies for success. So this is some data from our FinBin database at the University of Minnesota. It's mostly Minnesota herds, but it also includes herds from Ohio, Michigan. There's a few Michigan herds in there. There's a few Wisconsin herds in there. But what I did with this is I sorted it by conventional and AMS herds. And then conventional herds, I sorted from herd size from 50 to 500 cows, because that's where most of the AMS herds are kind of fall into that category. And the herd size between these two herds is within about 4 or 5 cows. And so all I'd like to emphasize is that, as you might imagine, the AMS herds are higher in production because most of the conventional herds will be milking 2x. You can see the increase in labor, and I just like to remind you that labor is really hard to measure on dairy farms. So even when I talk to the people that collect this data, our farm management instructors, they'll say, just kind of take the labor numbers with a grain of salt. You can see the feed cost information, and you can also see the net return. And the net return is better for our conventional farms, but I think it's important to remember that a lot of these conventional farms are older freestall barns. A lot of the parlors are paid for, and so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. But I also like to put in the top 40% of the AMS farms, and you can see that they're very competitive with conventional farms. And when I would look at the top 40% of conventional farms and compared to the top 40% of AMS farms, they're actually really very close. So I think part of the moral of the story from an economic standpoint is if you're an AMS farm and you've got a lot of upfront investment, you really have to do a good job and to be successful economically. Greg is going to spend a lot of time talking about nutrition, so I'm just going to emphasize excellent transition management. You know, this is a slide I like to use looking at how this really works. This doesn't matter whether it's in a conventional farm or an AMS farms, but excellent pre-calving management really promotes high post-calving dry matter intake. And that promotes really healthy, fresh cows. That promotes when the cows are feeling good. And that's really important in an AMS system. I think we underestimate that because in a conventional system, when we wanted to milk, we're going to go get them and we're going to chase them through the parlor. We need cows that really feel good and are healthy and have healthy rumens in these robotic barns. But if we got healthy, fresh cows, we're going to have higher early lactation visits. That's going to promote milk production. That's going to promote PMR intake. That high milk production continues to drive PMR intake. And of course, we kind of get this circle. That's what we want. We want high PMR intake, high visits, healthy cows. And ultimately, we end up with our goal of high visits, high production, high intake, and a healthy herd. Some recommended feeding management. Again, this doesn't matter whether it's a AMS herd or a conventional herd. All your listeners will be familiar with this. We want 80 to 90% freestall density in our fresh cow or on our pre-fresh and pre-calving pen, 30-inch of bunk space. I think we have not emphasized enough in these robotic dairies the importance of high quality forage. There's a lot of discussion traditionally on pellets. We need really high quality feed in the robot to drive cows, but I think we really need high quality forage in that PMR, because that really, it allows us to feed a higher energy diet without high starch and our cows to stay healthy. And it's important to monitor our forage and have a really consistent PMR. Again, it affects cows a lot more in a robotic system because it can affect visits than it will in a conventional system. So some other things that we've picked up, this was our last study that we did, or one of the last studies that we did. We picked up feeding more than one feed type actually was associated with a little higher milk production. Again, I don't know if it's the well-managed farms just had higher, tended to feed more feed, but we did pick that up in our research trial. You can see we had some farms that fed up to 3 feeds, and they did achieve a little higher average milk production per cow and also per robot. As far as looking at barn design, just a couple of slides on that. Again, really not different than a conventional farm, although I would argue maybe more important in an AMS farm or a robotic farm. We need really good ventilation. We need soft beds. We need clean bedding. We want to get cows to lay down. There's a lot of discussion. I need to make alleys wider? Do I need to make my crossovers wider and bigger? I'll argue that, yeah, that's not a bad thing. But the most important thing you can do is make a really comfortable bed so that cows lay down and they're not standing in the alleyway plugging up the alleys. So we need well-designed stalls. We need access to feed and water. We need good crossovers. And there's always this discussion about where to put the foot bath. There's multiple philosophies about that. And I just don't have time to talk a lot about that right now. I think it's also important to design a barn for labor efficiency. I think it's important to remember that an AMS facility to maximize labor efficiency, you need to think about the entire system. It's just not plopping a robot barn in a traditional barn and managing it the same way. You're not as likely to be successful. So I've talked a little bit about fresh cow management. How are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? First milking, things like that. I think it's clearly beneficial to have separation pens if you can. Many of our small dairies don't, but I think as dairies get bigger, again, it just allows you to manage cows without going into a pen of 60 or 120 or 180 cows and sort out some cows when you've got these separation pens. Headlocks, we can debate whether you need them or not, but I think it just makes sometimes management a little bit easier. A lot of barns, some barns have them, some barns don't. I like drover's lanes, again, whether it's a conventional dairy or an AMS dairy. I really like split entry to the robot. I think there's some real beneficial to that. And I think a little longer split entry, we could talk a little bit about that if anybody has any questions, but I think you really need a split entry in a free flow barn design to allow those cows to get through a couple different ways to get to the robot. Strategically placed gates so one person could go out and fetch cows and get cows. And I think it's important to have really well-designed commitment pens if you've got a guided flow system, and just make it easy for those cows to get in and out of those commitment pens and have access to the robot. Our research showed that you get more milk with automatic feed push-ups. There's other research out of Canada that shows kind of the same thing. Ours is a little bit maybe higher production than some of the other research will show. I would argue, I don't think you're going to get 11 pounds more milk per cow with automatic feed push-up. This is a trial we did a few years ago. But I think clearly there's enough research showing now that any kind of automatic feed push up, and I'm sure many of the listeners may have conventional dairies and are putting in automatic systems that push up feed, because it's a higher, think of it as an employee that's going to push up feed consistently. Let's say get lost or something like that. Automatic manure removal systems will also, at least our last study showed that we picked up some milk production. Is it because of less cow disruption? I'm not sure. I can take you to some farms that have manual manure removal systems that have really high production. But one thing I think it really does is it really improves labor efficiency on these barns. If you have to go into the pens and remove manure 2 or 3 times a day, it really does disrupt the cows, and it really adds a lot to the labor. So again, if you think of your AMS system as an entire system to maximize labor efficiency, I think you've really strongly got to consider some kind of automatic manure removal system. This is a couple of different trials that we did looking at factors that affect milk per robot. A lot of them are the same in milk per cow, just for the sake of time. I don't have time to show all of those, but milking visits per day. So this is just total number of visits to the robot. This isn't necessarily visits per cow. This is just if you get more visits to the robot, you're likely to get more milk per cow. Kind of logically makes sense. And of course, milking speed gets picked up. Not too surprising. Again, cows that milk faster, you're more likely to get more milking visits per robot. Cows per AMS unit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but we pretty consistently pick that up. And of course, there's kind of a challenge here a little bit, right? If you get more cows per AMS, and I'll show you the data, you might get a few less visits per cow to the robot. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Automatic manure removal system. We picked that up in one of our studies. Robot feed per cow. I'll say that I always get a little nervous when I put this up there, because I think sometimes higher producing cows, and particularly some higher producing herds, sometimes feed a little more robot feed. So I'm not sure that necessarily feeding more feed will automatically get you more milk per robot. I might think it might be an association that just higher producing cows tend to need more robot feed, or they feed more through that. Multiple feeds to the robot system. I showed that data earlier. Residual feed, though, that's feed that cows are programmed to receive that they actually do not consume. And so we can't be feeding our cows too much feed through the robot, particularly at any one time. They may not be able to eat that. Failed visits, again, not too surprising. A failed visit, or a visit where a cow was supposed to, she had permission to milk. She didn't get, for whatever reason, she didn't get completely milked out. Refused visits. You want a certain number of refusals. We always pick up more refusals, we don't get as much milk per robot. Even cows that refuse more, they don't milk as much. And there was actually a study done in Wisconsin that showed the same thing. They looked at income over feed cost, and more refusals meant lower income over feed cost. And of course, robot per pens. Some of the other keys to success is higher milk per cow and per robot. High early lactation visits promote high intake and high milk production, and high milk per cow is correlated with high milk per robot. This is some data. It's just from one herd, information that Mike Brook collected, and it's more of a demonstration than anything else. I only showed first lactation cows here. Second lactation, the data looks exactly the same, but you can see in early lactation, clearly more visits results in a lot more milk per average milk per cow per day. And you can see even late lactation, you get a lot more milk per cow. Look at these cows that, like robots, 145 days in milk, milking 4 times. Here, the average heifers are still milking about 100 pounds per day. So my only point of this slide is to emphasize we really need to develop strategies in our herds to try and get these early lactation cows milked more often. I'm guessing most listeners are real familiar with the data that Jeff Dahl did a number of years ago, looking at 2x versus 4x on fresh cows and 3x versus 6x on fresh cows. And of course, you got a nice bump in milk production if you milk those early lactation cows more frequently. And it's why would we expect that to be any different in a robot dairy? In some herds, first lactation cows really struggle getting visits in early lactation. So yeah, this is one particular farm that we did a little project. It was kind of a retrospective study looking at over a period of time, they had expanded their barn, and then they had the opportunity to allow cows to go through the robot because they had spare robot time. And you can see what happened. This is kind of, the blue bars are previous to pre-training heifers, and then the red bars, oh no, this is all of our data, just looking at our data, looking at pre-fresh cows and primiparous cows. And you can see these heifers, I'm sorry, the multiparous cows in the red bars, they went really often, really early in lactation. This is 4th week milking frequency. And you can see the red circles here, I'm sorry, the yellow circles, even at 4 week, and you would think that by 4th week, these heifers would kind of have the situation figured out. But there's a fair number of these herds, 5 out of 32, that they were barely milking twice a day. And these are average milking frequencies. So if your average is twice a day, you know there's some primiparous cows or first lactations cows going through 3 times. So there's a fair number of them going through less than twice a day. And we all know that that's probably not the best for those cows to maximize milk production. Here's a study I was referencing. This is a pre-fresh pen of heifers, and you see the robot here, and this is where they calve their heifers in. And so they had excess robot time. So what they basically did twice a day, or do twice a day, is walk their cows through the robot. Doesn't take a lot of time because there aren't that many pre-fresh cows, pre-fresh heifers. This is the data, and you can see the maroon bars are before they were trained. The gold bars are after they were trained. And you see the first 7 days in milk, but by about 3 weeks in milk, these cows were going through just about 1 more time on an average per cow per day. This farm will also argue, boy, by about 2 or 3 days in milk, almost all of the heifers are going through on their own. So this kind of started out as a little bit of I'll call it an experiment on this farm because they had excess robot time because they were just filling up their barns. But they've continued to do this, and I think this farm has no intention right now of going back to where they did not pre-train heifers. We have more farms, I don't know if any in New York, but a lot of them are in the upper Midwest are noticing these heifers are a little bit struggling through these barns, just getting visits in early lactation. So some they're installing kind of these pre-training pens in their close-up, pre-training stalls in their close-up pen. You can see obviously these aren't milking robots, but they kind of look like it. And so they're kind of chasing the barns through that, or the cows through that. There's a few other ones that will maybe move the pre-fresh heifers into their barn, maybe in a separation area if they have it. Even I think they'll argue 2 or 3 days of kind of pre-training these heifers really makes a difference in once they freshen. I think it's important to get cows off to a good start. I always say to train heifers, practice the behavior you want in early lactation. And so ideally, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do this. First couple days, teach them about the entire pen. So just don't get them into the barn, chase them right into the robot. I think you've kind of got to get them used to what the pen looks like. Remember, this is a different concept than we would chase them to a holding area and just milk them. We need to get them to learn about the pen and getting around the pen, particularly if they're not used to this system. And then I would encourage people to fetch in the morning and evening. For most of our small dairies, that's what they do. So they fetch, basically, they just want to fetch twice a day. If I tell them they ought to fetch their heifers 3 or 4 times a day, they say, Jim, why don't you come out and do it in the morning and middle of the night? I think it's important to move slow. And I think if you can, if there's somebody around, try and fetch these heifers maybe an extra time at noon, and don't make it exactly the same time every day. But I think if you can, try to fetch them an extra time or 2 maybe. And then I think it's important to guide them and not chase them to the robot. People are so afraid that they're going to train them when I come in the pen and, well, yeah, I'm here again, so I guess it's time for me to be milked. I think you got to be a little bit stealthy when you do this, and kind of go in and I'll say guide them. So get a rake and clean off the stalls and kind of get them up toward the robot, and maybe not even chase them in the fetch pen and shut the gate. Just kind of say, hey, here, buddy, it's time for you. Remember that really good feed is there. So I think we can be a little, we can be a little more strategic in how we train these heifers. I think these are some of the questions I get most often as I'm speaking, and I think they're points to ponder. What's the right number of milkings per cow per day? And what's the right number of cows per robot? And I don't think we've quite got that all figured out yet. This is some of our data from one of our latest trials and what happened. And these are sorted out. And you'd see on the ends, the number of herds are pretty low. So I'm not saying this is the right answer. This is just the data as it is. But not too surprising, free time are in the gold bars. And as you can see, as you add more cows per robot, free times tend to go down. These robots tend to get pretty busy. Our maximum number of visits per cow per day maximizes at 56 to 60 cows at 2.89. And then it tends to go down. And I think it's an interesting point that a lot of farmers will sit around in meetings and kind of talk / brag that they want to get an average of three milkings per cow per day. And my response to them is I think that's an irrelevant number. It's kind of like average calving interval. The average number of milkings per cow per day to me is really irrelevant. It's getting the right cows milked at the right time. And when I look at the milk production across this data, so let's just say 56 to 70 cows average per robot, even though these milk less, there is no difference. This average group is between 81 and 86 pounds of milk per cow per day. And actually the highest numerically is the 66 to 70 cows. So I think part of this is what your goals are as a farm. Obviously these guys out here that are at 66 to 70 cows, they do fetch more cows. They'll openly admit they fetch more cows, but they're averaging 2.6, but they're getting as much milk as the guys are averaging 2.9, because these guys have figured out how to get the right cows to the robot at the right time. This is our data. When you look at it, kind of a scatter graph. As cows per robot increased, the amount of milk as cows per robot increased, the amount of milk per robot increases. Here's what our statistics show. For every additional cow, up to a point, obviously, milk per robot increased about 29 kilos per gram. And you can see I drew a line here you can see the 60 line, and then there's no cows that reached over 50. This is a year's worth of data. So this is collecting data off the robot. This isn't a 7-day average. This is a year's worth of data. But you can see as we got some of these farms up here, even at 65 to 70 cows, they got a lot more. They average over 6,000 pounds of milk per robot. I'm not telling you what the right number is. I think it really varies for your farm. But I think it is possible, and there are some farms. Now, you're not going to do this the first year you're in robots. You have to have the right cows. So it's going to take you a few years to kind of get the right cows, get your management, get your feeding figured out, and you've got to have the right mindset. And it's not for everyone. There's a farm I work with, they run about 20% free time. They get good milk per cow, but they don't run, they're probably in the mid 50s for cows per robot. And they say, we are big crop farmers. We don't have time, if our robot is down, to spend a lot of time fetching cows, chasing them through, making sure we kind of get caught up. So I think a little of this really depends upon what your goals are as a dairy farmer. Is it try to maximize robot productivity, or is it a little bit more the lifestyle where you just don't have the time to do it? But I think clearly, especially with the newer models of robot, doesn't matter which company you're speaking about, all the new ones have better cameras and better lasers, and they do a nicer job. So the newer models of robots, you're able to push those numbers. If you've got the older models, you might have a little bit more of a challenge getting to that number. I think a lot of this has to do with the right milking access settings. I'm not sure exactly what the right number is. I think it varies, but this is a farm on the bottom. His goal is to have his cows average 40 pounds every time they come in. And you can see he's pretty darn close to that number. I'm not sure that's exactly the right number, but I think conceptually, that's where we need to be at. We don't want cows coming in with empty udders because it's hard to prep those udders. It's hard to get a lot of milk out of those udders. So I think that that's the right concept. What the right number is, I'm not sure. But, and how I asked this farmer, I know him well. I said, how'd you come up with that number? He said, I noticed that's when my cows really started leaking, is when they got about 40 pounds of milk in their udders. So that's really where I want to be. And of course, you can't set your milking permissions at 40 pounds. You won't average 40. If you set your milking at 40, you'll be over that number. So I think the other thing, these are for people that don't have robots. I think you have to be used to dealing with the imperfection of robots. They don't do a great job. They don't do a bad job, but they don't do a great job of cow prep and dipping. You just got to accept that. I just tell people, if you've got poor milkers in a parlor, the robot will do a better job. If you've got really good milkers in a parlor, the robot's not going to do as good of a job. A robot can't tell whether a teat's dirty or clean. I think dealing with milk quality mastitis, IDing it, dealing with contagious organisms can be a little bit tricky. You've really got to be prepared. If you've got a lot of contagious organisms and you're going to put in robots, you better have a discussion with your veterinarian about how to deal with that. Some cows don't read the book and behave like you hope. There's going to be really high producing cows that for whatever reason, they're going to go through twice a day. And you just got to learn to live with that. Training heifers can be kind of a pain. Alarms can be a pain. Maintenance is expensive, but you got to do it. If a takeoff isn't working in a parlor, you can work around it. You've got to have these robots working. Light coders can be a little bit of a challenge. You get a few more failed milkings, and you really need a different skill set. And you need to train your employees just to engage their brain and think about which cows are fetching and which ones to try and make robots most efficient. Just a couple of slides left here. High milk production, how do we get it? High visits, early lactation. Talked about that. Well-balanced diets, excellent transition cows. Again, these are no different than a parlor herd. We want really good reproductive efficiency. We want excellent cow comfort. We want really low somatic cell count. You really need to change our mindset maybe and focus on milk per robot per day. So we need to maximize milk per minute of box time. So that's milking speed, that's having cows come in because the prep time takes the same, having cows come in with the optimum amount of milk in their udder. I think that's machine settings, minimize prep time. We need good cow cooperation. I see as many cows get sold for cow cooperation and dancing around in the stalls as cows that with cross teats and things like that. I just think these farms that are getting really high milk per cow, they're pretty impatient with cows that kick off units and fail a lot. Optimize free time, whatever that might be on your farm, and optimize refusals. In summary, labor and cost and availability is going to continue to be a challenge on our farms. So I think that's why, especially the larger farms, are looking at robots. It really does require really good management, requires an excellent, you can hear me harping on this transition cow program. I think it's important to help the cows, help your robots succeed. Really work with your nutritionist and your dealer to get these milk and feed access tables set correctly, get the right kind of employees. You need the right mindset and management, really need a good barn design if you can. Make sure you maintain the robots, keep everything as clean as you can. Dirty lasers can't find teats very well on cameras. Get to select the right kind of cows. You need a whole system approach for best success. And then you really do have to make sure you manage that cash flow. So with that, I think I'm okay for time, and then we'll take questions later.
Thank you, Jim, for this great presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who will be presenting insight into feeding in automated milking system. Dr. Greg Penner is a professor in the Department of Animal and Poultry Science at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Penner's research focuses on developing nutritional strategies to enhance the health and productivity of cattle, and he and his group have been working on projects to improve the knowledge of feeding management in AMS. So, Dr. Greg, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Can you just give me a nod if you can see the screen and hear me fine, Camilla?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Camilla and Victor, for the opportunity to present here today. I'm really excited about robotic milking systems and the feeding management within them. And I thought I would take a different approach with this presentation. And rather than going through and showing kind of the traditional scientific approach where we explain the experiments, I thought I would try to break down common comments that I hear and whether those are myths or whether they are reality, and recognize that myths and realities can be situationally dependent, but I'm going to break them down or challenge them from a research perspective. So does the research support each of these four statements? So the four we're going to go through is whether feeding more concentrate in the AMS can reduce negative energy balance for cows in early lactation. This kind of gets at that precision feeding concept that Dr. Salfer was talking about. We're going to talk about whether altering concentrate quantities in the AMS can allow for precision feeding, whether feeding management needs to differ between guided and free flow barns. This is a very common comment that I hear. And then finally, whether or not pellets are required in that AMS. So getting at the first one, whether we can actually improve or reduce the proportion of cows with negative energy balance. There's some excellent work done by Dr. Trevor DeVries at the University of Guelph with his, at that time, postdoc, Dr. King. And what they did in this study is they looked at behavioral responses of cows that were identified for, in this case, subclinical ketosis, and they compared those behavioral responses to healthy cows. And clearly, relative to the timing of subclinical ketosis diagnosis, which was based on blood BHB, you can see there are a lot of behavioral changes. You can see there are some time-dependent milk yield changes. And certainly when we start looking at supplement intake, and this would be the AMS concentrate intake, we can identify that those healthy cows really did have higher AMS concentrate consumption or intake relative to those cows that were identified to later come down with subclinical ketosis. So this really starts, I guess, questioning, is it, an outcome of that subclinical ketosis, or is this a driver behind that? They have another study where they looked at basically the odds ratio or the risk of being diagnosed with subclinical ketosis. And in this case, they found a very different outcome in that when you look at supplement intake as a whole, you can see that there really is no effect, although when you correct milk yield as a component of or supplement intake relative to milk yield, you can see they can actually detect responses. So this, I think, really challenges and leaves some muddy water in terms of whether or not we will actually see or could see a reduction in subclinical ketosis with feeding more concentrate. We conducted a study fairly recently, still unpublished work as of yet, and this study was really designed to understand how that immediate post-fresh feeding management in the robot might impact production outcomes. And as a secondary objective, we characterized energy status using blood BHBs and milk BHBs as indicators. So I just want to set up this experiment. We had a static partial mixed ration that was formulated. We're looking at about 90% of the predicted ME and metabolizable protein allowable milk yield. We were expecting cows to consume 27 kilos of dry matter, 40 kilos of milk production with 4:1 fat and almost a 3:1 true protein. So this was just the PMR, and you might be saying, well, these are under-formulated PMRs for fresh cows, and certainly they would be. We would not expect that level of dry matter intake, and we would expect that at least within the first 21 days, they're probably not achieving 40 kilos of milk either. When we combined the PMR with our AMS feeding strategies, that supplemented the total diet so that we were dealing with 40 kilos of metabolizable energy and metabolizable protein, allowable milk yield for our low supplement group, and 42 for our high supplement group, okay? So we have those low in the AMS, high in the AMS, and we're comparing those. The high AMS also had two different strategies. So there was a shift from 3 to 8 kilos over 15 days, or a shift from 3 kilos to 8 kilos over 5 days within the first part of lactation. So these cows entered the AMS on the day of calving, and we monitored their responses in a detailed manner for the first 28 days, and then we followed them up with a little less focused management for the following 28 days. So first issue I want to get at is very clear, and you're going to see this throughout this presentation. Remember that we were targeting up to 8 kilos of dry matter intake, or 8 kilos of pellet intake in the AMS for those moderate and rapidly adapted cattle, and we did not achieve anywhere near that. Those cattle were only consuming about 4.5 kilos at peak intake, and this didn't matter whether we were in the first 4 weeks or shifting into week 5 to 8. So our high cows are not consuming as much as we had expected or hoped, and this is actually a pretty common outcome. In association with that higher AMS intake, we did actually see a tendency for those high cows to consume less PMR. So by providing more in the AMS, we cannot simply expect those cows to eat more. There is a trade-off between how much PMR and how much AMS concentrate they will consume. Milking frequency tended to be higher for those cows offered less in the AMS, and milk yield actually also tended to be higher. And when we factor in milk fat yield, we actually have statistical improvements in terms of milk fat yield for the first 28 days for those cows fed low amounts of concentrate in the AMS relative to those fed high. The interesting point, and really getting back at the issue of, are we increasing or decreasing negative energy balance? We actually found there was no statistical difference in plasma glucose, body weight, body condition score, serum BHBs, or milk BHBs as affected by the amount of concentrate in the AMS. So really, from the one of the very few controlled studies that has been conducted, there does not seem to be much evidence to support that feeding more in the robot would actually reduce the negative energy balance. The second statement I want to, challenge is whether altering quantities of concentrate in the AMS allows for precision feeding. And I think it's important to recognize, and I'm glad Dr. Salfer mentioned the PMR, but quite often we start focusing extensively on the AMS and the AMS feeding strategies, and we might forget that the PMR still forms the bulk of the nutrient intake for these dairy cows, regardless of the AMS feeding strategy. We also have the concept of multiple rations, and so I'm sure on the parlor-fed cows, we've heard of, a formulated diet, a delivered diet, and then what the cows actually consume. Well, we have that, plus we have the same concepts from an AMS perspective. We have our software programmed amounts, so these would be the amounts that are in the feeding tables within whatever software platform you're using to manage your AMS. Then we would have what the cows actually get delivered, and so depending on the type of system you have, there are different rules for how that concentrate gets delivered, when it gets delivered, and how fast it gets delivered. And those cows still can make the choice whether they consume that concentrate or not. So this is some data that I've compiled from a number of studies, and these studies use different strategies to control the difference between the programmed amount, so that in the software, and that which actually the AMS delivers. So in the first two studies, the studies of Halachmi and Bach, what they did was formulated the diet, and they entered the formulated target within the software, and then they measured the cow response. And so you can see in the gray columns that the cow response was much less than the targeted amount shown in the circles with the X that was entered into the software. So from a nutritionist perspective, certainly these systems are not meeting our diet delivery expectations, as the delivered diet is even different from the formulated diet. In these studies, we took a little bit different approach where we actually over-entered the amount of concentrate in the software. So we told the software to deliver more than we formulated, and we monitored the amount delivered to make sure that the amount delivered actually met with what we had formulated those diets for. So two different approaches, but I think the main point I want to emphasize is the amount programmed into that software is not the amount that will be delivered. And as Jim mentioned for milk allowances, if you enter your target, you will always be below achieving your target. In addition to what's delivered, we know that cows don't always consume the concentrate that's there. And unfortunately, that relationship becomes greater or more steep as the amount of concentrate allowance or programmed quantities increase. So this is some work that was compiled by Bach and Cabrera, and they showed very clearly that as the amount of concentrate provided or programmed into the software went up, the amount of concentrate that was left behind in the robot when the cows left increased. This has been shown in a free flow experiment. This is a study where they had Holsteins or Jerseys, and they grouped them into individual feeding strategies or control feeding strategies. The control feeding strategies were allocated a static amount in the AMS throughout lactation, and the individual feeding strategy was a progressively increasing concentrate strategy relative to milk yield and relative to targeted dry matter intake. So essentially, this individual group shown in the dark bars was provided more concentrate in the robot, generally throughout lactation, with an adaptation period during early. What I want to highlight from here again is the concept that delivered is not consumed. So this is a unique system where they could actually measure the amount of concentrate that remained in the bunk when the cows left, and they could remove that amount, preventing other cows from eating it. And what you can see very clearly is the more concentrate that those cows received, the more concentrate that those cows left behind them in the robot after they left. So this really challenges the concept of whether we think the software is actually providing us a good indication on how much those cows are consuming in the AMS. And the reliability of that information probably decreases as the concentrate allocation goes up. On top of that, if we're focusing on precision feeding, we need to recognize that the AMS concentrate feeding allocation strategy will also affect partial mixed ration intake. So this is a very simple study where the diets were designed to be isocaloric, but we increased the amount of concentrate in the AMS from 500 grams a day, so basically a pound a day, up to about 11 pounds a day. And as those cows were delivered more concentrate, they consumed less PMR, and their overall dry matter intake was not affected. So because this dietary strategy incorporated isocaloric diets, really energy intake was not affected, and neither was milk yield. In this study, we decided to hold the same PMR energy density as you would have to do in a group feeding situation in automated milking systems. And then within that PMR, we either offered them a high concentrate allocation at 6 kilos a day or a low concentrate allocation at 2 kilos a day. So we're really looking at about 4.5 pounds relative to almost 13 pounds of pellet in the robot. What you can see again very clearly is as they ate more concentrate in the robot, they ate less PMR at the feed bunk. And in this case, while there's a numerical increase in dry matter intake, statistically, these are not different. And we did not observe a difference in terms of milk yield responses either. So whether we adjust the dietary energy density of the PMR or we keep it the same, there is ample data to suggest that we probably will not always see a change in terms of milk yield or visits. We've summarized a bunch of studies that have been conducted, and certainly we see this same response. where as we start increasing the amount of concentrate, we see that compensatory reduction in PMR intake. So the substitution ratio that I'm showing you here shows the magnitude of reduction in PMR intake as the concentrate intake goes up by 1 kilo. So in the study of Bach, as those cows ate 1 kilo more pellet in the AMS, they decreased PMR intake by 1.14 kilos. In a study that we conducted quite a few years ago now, as cows increased pellet consumption by 1 kilo, they decreased PMR intake by almost 1.6 kilos. So a very large reduction, and actually a reduction that overcompensates for the greater energy in that pellet. And then on the other hand, we can see values as low as 0.5, meaning they're only dropping PMR intake by 0.5 kilos of dry matter for every 1 kilo of dry matter increase in AMS concentrate intake. And this is really the situation that we would hope for, where AMS concentrate could build and help improve total dry matter intake. The challenge as we look across free flow barns in blue and guided flow barns in white is that there is really a lack of consistency and a lack of predictability in terms of when we're going to have a high substitution ratio, so a negative outcome, at least numerically on dry matter intake, or a positive outcome, which would give us at least a numerical improvement or no change in PMR dry matter intake. So in my opinion, this really challenges the ability for us to implement precision feeding approaches simply by altering the amount of concentrate provided in the AMS. On top of that, there's a fair amount of data that has shown that as we increase the amount of concentrate in the AMS, we increase the daily variation in the diet for those cows. So these are studies comparing different allocation amounts of AMS concentrate. You can see as we shift from 2 kilos to 6 kilos, we increase the variation in how much those cows consume on a daily basis. So if we value the concept that cows need a consistent diet and a consistent routine, increasing the amount of concentrate may challenge that situation. So those previous studies were all done in a guided flow barn. This is data from a free flow barn, again showing the very same response as they increased concentrate allocation for those individual concentrate feeding strategy cows. They also statistically increased the variation in concentrate intake among cows within a day or across days. So this is a within cow difference. They also increase the variation between cows that should be on the same level of the feeding table. So even though we say we're individually feeding and managing cows, we apply a static feed table to them that is based on their milk performance or days in milk or some other outcome. And we need to recognize that even though that feed table is identifying those cows based on individual criteria, as we start increasing the amount of concentrate provided in the AMS, it actually leads to more variation in the program that we actually implement. So I think these really challenge the nature of simply changing the amount of concentrate in the AMS as a strategy to implement precision feeding management. Another comment I commonly hear is feeding management needs to differ between free flow and guided flow. And this one is a little harder to, I guess, to challenge, but my approach is to look at the data that we have between free flow and guided flow barns. And that'll be accomplished kind of at the end of this little subsection when I compare performance outcomes. What we know very clearly, and this is early work, again from Alex Bach, showing that as they increase concentrate from 3 kilos to 8 kilos, again, they did not achieve that level of concentrate intake. Those cows only consumed 6.8 kilos instead of 8, and 2.6 versus 3. And as they ate more AMS pellet, they decreased their PMR intake. And when we look at the milk yield response, there was absolutely no difference in milk yield, and there was no difference in milk components. In that individual feeding strategy, you can see here the concentrate intake program for primiparous and multiparous cows as they went through a week of lactation. So you can see those control cows received about 2.1, 2.2 kilos of concentrate throughout lactation. You can see visually that that response is very consistent throughout the lactation event, whereas those individual concentrate feeding strategy cows received more concentrate, but you can see, as I've been showing, the variability in terms of what they actually consume on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis differs quite dramatically. So they were all fed the same PMR, did increasing the amount of concentrate provided in the robot change milk yield in that free flow cow system, and the response is absolutely not. There was no difference regardless on stage of lactation. There was no difference when they corrected it based on energy corrected milk. And in fact, when they look at milk composition, milk fat and milk protein percent were actually lower for the individual concentrate feeding strategies than control during the late lactation portion of this study. So really very limited evidence to confirm that milk yield will be affected by the amount of concentrate in the AMS. We've again summarized most of the controlled studies. We're missing a couple now in this table. But what I want to highlight are the guided flow barn studies in white and the free flow barn studies in blue. And you can see, again, a high variability in the response and a lack of consistency that increasing the amount of concentrate in the AMS as a sole strategy will actually increase milk yield or milk visits. Final issue I want to task is whether you need to feed a pellet. And we conducted a study published very recently where we compared what would be considered non-typical AMS supplements. And part of the reason we did this is we wanted to minimize potential variation in the composition of this feed as affected by pelleting. So in this study, we used a straight barley supplement, and that barley was either pelleted or it was steam rolled. And so the same barley was used for both of those outcomes. We had no effect on milk yield, almost 45 kilos per day, no effect on fat yield, about 1.6 kilos a day, and protein yield was about 1.5 kilos a day, regardless of the supplements strategy. However, we had a numerical reduction, and it's a tendency for reduced milking numbers per day when we fed the steam rolled barley relative to the pelleted barley. Those cows that were in the steam rolled barley treatment tended to have longer intervals between milkings, which would help explain the numerical reduction in milking numbers. And because we're in a guided flow barn, those cows decided to spend more time in the holding area or more time in the commitment pen before entering the robot. And so this suggests to us that there is something about that pellet form that is encouraging cows to voluntarily enter the AMS. And as a consequence, they also had less total milking time when we calculate this as minutes per day. So I think this is one case where there could be lost opportunity in terms of voluntary attendance to the AMS if we tend to shift from a pelleted to another feed form in that AMS. In this system, we calibrated the robot quite regularly, and we were sure it was not due to variation in terms of that calibration response to the amount delivered. It looks to be something related to actually preference of those cows as driving some of that milk yield or milking visit activity. So going all the way back to the beginning, is it a myth or reality? My assumptions on myths, at least based on published literature, would suggest that feeding more concentrate in the AMS to reduce negative energy balance probably is a myth. Altering quantities of concentrate in the AMS to allow for precision feeding is probably a myth. Feeding management needs to differ between guided and free flow barns. Again, I think that's probably a myth. And then pellets are required. And here I would say, well, maybe it's a partial reality. And I think pellets are not necessarily required, but they may be useful in terms of helping stimulate voluntary attendance. With that, I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'm happy and excited to address questions as they may come up. And I'd certainly like to thank the funders and the students and technicians that have contributed to data collection for this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much for another excellent presentation. And our attendees, they probably had a lot to think about.
I'd like to thank you again, Jim and Greg, for the great presentations and, to agree to come and join us on this webinar. It was great discussion, a lot of questions come in. And I would like to remind our attendees that we are recording this webinar and that we are making it available on our web extension channels. So you guys can rewatch and share them with people that you think would enjoy this webinar. So thank you very much. And Vitor, do you have anything?
Thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you again, Greg and Jane, for accepting our invitation. It was really great. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, me as well. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.